The explosion ripped to the power station at 0347 hours, and the world became a cascade of falling concrete and screaming metal. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Wade felt the floor disappear beneath his boots. He was airborne for what felt like an eternity, 2 seconds at most, before his shoulder slammed into something solid. Debris rained down around him. Dust choked his lungs. His NVGs had been knocked askew, leaving him blind in a universe of darkness and destruction. Contact! Contact! 3 directions. The voice belonged to Jensen, somewhere to Wade's left. The rapid bark of rifle fire punctuated the chaos. M4A1 carbines answered the enemy's opening salvo. Wade rolled onto his stomach, adjusted his night vision, and forced his brain to process the nightmare unfolding around him. The basement level of the structure had partially collapsed. The stairwell they'd used to descend, the only egress point on the eastern side, was now a mountain of rubble. Electrical cables sparked and danced like dying serpents. The temperature had dropped from freezing to somehow colder, the mountain wind finding new pathways to the shattered walls. Wade! Wade, where's the commander? Torres was crawling toward him, blood streaming from a gash above his left eye. His weapon was up, scanning the darkness beyond their perimeter. Wade's stomach dropped through the floor. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Brennan had been standing at the northern exit when the first RPG impacted. She had been screaming at them to move, her voice cutting through the chaos with 17 years of command authority. Wade remembered seeing her silhouette against the muzzle flashes, remembered her hands physically shoving Kim and Hayes toward the breach point. And then the ceiling had come down. Sound off. Wade barked. Sound off now. Jensen. I'm up. Torres. Moving. Kim. Here. Sullivan. I've got Hayes. He's hit but mobile. 5 voices. 5 operators. There should have been 6. Wade scrambled toward the northern section of the basement, where the collapse had created a wall of concrete and twisted rebar that rose nearly to the remaining ceiling. His boots slipped on loose debris. Somewhere above, enemy voices were shouting in a language he didn't recognize. Coordinated, tactical, hunting. Commander Brennan. Brennan, respond. Nothing. He keyed his radio, switching to her personal encrypted frequency. Viper Actual, this is Viper 2. Report your position. Over. Static. Viper Actual, Sitrep. Over. The mountain wind howled through the gaps in the destroyed structure. Snow began filtering down to the holes in the ceiling, mixing with the concrete dust to create a gray slurry that coated everything. Wade pressed his palm against the rubble pile. The concrete was still warm from the explosion. Somewhere beneath this, somewhere under 15 feet of building collapse, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Brennan was either dead or dying, and there was nothing he could do about it. Chief, Jensen was at his shoulder, voice tight. They're massing on the eastern approach. At least 20 combatants. We need to move. Wade's jaw clenched so hard, he thought his teeth might crack. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to start digging, to tear at the rubble with his bare hands until his fingers bled, to refuse to leave her behind. But he knew what she would say. He had served under Brennan for 3 years. He had watched her carry wounded operators across mountain passes. He had seen her take shrapnel to the thigh and keep moving for 7 hours. He had stood beside her at Arlington when they buried a teammate who had died in her arms during a night insertion in Syria. She would tell him to complete the mission. She would tell him to get her team out. She would look him in the eye with that quiet, unshakable certainty and say, "The mission comes first. I come second. You come third." And she would mean it. Move to the northern breach point. Wade heard himself say. The words tasted like ash. Sullivan, keep Hayes on his feet. Torres, you're on point. Jensen, cover our 6. Chief, Kim's voice cracked. He was 26 years old, the second youngest on the team. His eyes were fixed on the rubble pile. We can't just... We are following orders. Wade grabbed Kim by the collar and pulled him close, their faceplates nearly touching. She told us to move. She told us to continue mission. That is what we're going to do. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage and hit that notification bell so you never miss a mission. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 3 weeks earlier, the snow in Montana had been falling for 9 hours straight. Wade remembered standing at the edge of the training compound, watching the white curtain descend with something approaching reverence. The thermometer bolted to the side of the operations building read -32 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill pushed it down to -40. Lieutenant Commander Brennan had insisted on running the winter survival evolution despite the conditions. The base commander had suggested postponement. Naval Special Warfare Group 4 had offered an indoor alternative. Every reasonable voice in the chain of command had recommended waiting for the weather to improve. Brennan had smiled that quiet smile of hers and said, "The enemy doesn't postpone their operations for weather. Neither do we." That was Brennan in a nutshell. Wade had never met anyone who led more by example or asked less of her team than she demanded of herself. During that 16-hour evolution, she had been the first one into the frozen river during the water crossing exercise. She had been the last one to reach the warming tent. And when Sullivan had gone under, when the current had dragged him beneath the ice and they had lost visual for 47 seconds, Brennan had been the one to dive in after him. Wade still remembered the way she had looked when she surfaced, Sullivan's arm locked in her grip, her lips blue and her body shaking with the early stages of hypothermia. "Get him to medical," she had said, her voice steady despite the tremors racking her frame. "And someone get me a thermos of coffee. We still have 8 hours left." That was who they were losing under the rubble in Khosrow. That was who Wade was walking away from. The northern breach point led to a narrow alley between the power station and what had once been a storage facility. The snow was coming down in sheets now, visibility reduced to maybe 30 feet. Wade could hear the enemy teams converging, their shouts bouncing off the abandoned Soviet-era buildings that surrounded them. "Base, this is Viper 2. Wade keyed the satellite uplink as they moved. "Viper Actual is missing, presumed Kia. Structure collapse. We are unable to recover. Continuing to Extraction Point Bravo." The response came through tinged with static, but clear enough. "Viper 2, copy all. Extraction assets are en route. ETA 42 minutes. Be advised, thermal imaging drone is overhead in 4 minutes. We will attempt to locate Viper Actual." Wade didn't believe in hope. Hope was for people who hadn't spent 17 years watching friends die in dark places far from home. But something in his chest flickered anyway. "Copy that, base. We'll hold for drone update." They pushed through the alley, weapons up, moving in a tactical column. Hayes was lagging. The shrapnel wound his left leg was slowing him down despite the tourniquet Sullivan had applied. The young operator's face was pale, his breathing rapid, but he hadn't complained once. Hayes was 23 years old. He had been with the team for only 11 months. And Wade knew, with the certainty that came from watching too many young warriors learn too many hard lessons, that this night would mark him forever. The kid had been closest to the northern exit when the collapse happened. Brennan had literally thrown him through the breach, her hands planted firmly on his tactical vest, launching him towards safety with a strength that seemed impossible for a woman her size. She had saved his life, and she had done it without hesitation. That was her gift. Wade realized that was what made her different from every other commanding officer he had served under. She didn't just lead from the front. She absorbed the danger herself. She positioned herself between her team and whatever threat existed, and she held that position until everyone else was clear. The drone arrived 4 minutes later, just as Base had promised. Wade watched the thermal feed on his wrist-mounted display, his breath forming clouds in the sub-zero air. The UAV made 3 passes over the collapsed structure, its sensors penetrating the debris in search of a heat signature. Nothing. "Viper 2, be advised. Thermal imaging shows no human signatures in the collapse zone. 15 feet of debris, significant heat radiation from damaged infrastructure. Unable to confirm or deny presence of Viper Actual." Wade closed his eyes. 15 feet of concrete. That meant she was buried deeper than they could dig, without heavy equipment. That meant even if she had survived the initial collapse, she was trapped in a space with limited oxygen and no way to communicate. That meant she was gone. The extraction helicopter touched down 38 minutes later in a clearing 400 meters north of Khosrow. The door gunner swept the tree line with their M240BS. Fingers on triggers, ready to pour 7.62 millimeters fire into anything that moved. Wade was the last one aboard. He stood at the ramp for 3 seconds longer than necessary, his eyes fixed on the town, they were leaving behind. The snow was filling in their tracks, erasing all evidence that they had ever been there. Erasing all evidence that she had ever been there. Chief, Sullivan's hand landed on his shoulder. We need to go. Wade nodded once and stepped onto the aircraft. The ramp rose behind him, sealing out the wind and the cold and the image of that rubble pile. The rotor screamed. The helicopter lifted. And just like that, they were gone. The flight back to the forward operating base took 22 minutes. Nobody spoke. Hayes had his head down, his hands clasped between his knees, his entire body vibrating with something that might have been pain or might have been something worse. Kim stared at the deck plating. Jensen cleaned his weapon with mechanical precision, his movements robotic and empty. Torres kept checking his radio, waiting for a voice that wasn't going to come. Wade sat with his back against the bulkhead and tried to construct a timeline. They had infiltrated Khosrow at 1847 hours with a 12-hour operational window. The mission was intelligence only. Photograph the weapons cache in the power station basement. Document everything and extract clean. No contact with hostile forces. No offensive action. Get in, get evidence. Get out. 9 hours into the mission, everything had fallen apart. The ambush had been coordinated. 3 directions simultaneously, which meant the enemy had known they were coming. That meant a leak somewhere, a communications intercept, a surveillance failure, maybe a human source feeding information to the other side. That meant someone had set them up. The FOB was 30 miles from Khosrow, a collection of reinforced structures and temporary shelters carved into the side of a mountain that didn't appear on any commercial maps. By the time they landed, the base commander was waiting on the helipad. Captain Morrison was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with a face that looked like it had been assembled from hard experience and poor decisions. He had commanded FOB Sentinel for 8 months. He had sent Brennan and her team into Khosrow. Chief Wade. His voice carried over the wind from the rotors. Report. Wade climbed off the aircraft and stood at attention despite the exhaustion pulling at his bones. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Brennan is missing in action. Presumed killed. Structure collapsed during hostile engagement. We were unable to recover her remains. Morrison's jaw tightened. Wade saw something flicker behind his eyes. Grief, maybe, or something closer to fear. Walk me through it. They walked. Wade explained everything. The approach, the entry, the 9 hours of careful surveillance and documentation, the coordinated ambush that had come out of nowhere. He described the collapse in clinical detail, forcing himself to remain detached, professional, the way Brennan would have wanted. The drone found nothing? Morrison asked. Negative, sir. 15 feet of debris. Heat signatures from damaged infrastructure masked any potential. Wade stopped himself. No confirmation either way. Morrison was silent for a long moment. The snow continued to fall around them, muffling the sounds of the base, creating a bubble of stillness in the midst of the chaos. She was the best officer I ever served with, Morrison said quietly, and that's not the grief talking. That's 17 years of watching her do impossible things and make them look routine. Wade had no response to that. He simply nodded. Get your team to medical. Debrief in 2 hours. Morrison turned away, then stopped. Chief, what was the last thing she said to you? Wade thought about it. The chaos of the collapse, the screaming, the dust and the darkness. But somewhere in that nightmare, there had been a moment of clarity. A single instant when their eyes had met through the smoke and debris. She said, continue mission. Don't stop. Morrison absorbed that. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. That sounds like her. The medical facility at FOB Sentinel was a converted warehouse with field surgical capabilities and 3 Navy corpsmen who hadn't slept in 36 hours. Sullivan took charge of Hayes' treatment personally, refusing to leave the young operator's side even after the shrapnel had been extracted and the wound properly dressed. Wade sat in the waiting area with the rest of the team. Nobody had touched the coffee that someone had brought them. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh, clinical white. I should have stayed. Wade looked up. Kim was staring at his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have stayed and dug. We could have. No. Wade cut him off. We couldn't. 15 feet of collapsed concrete. No heavy equipment. Hostile forces converging. Even if we had started digging immediately, we would have been overrun before we moved 6 inches of debris. But she saved my life. Kim's voice cracked. She literally threw me through that breach. I felt her hands on my vest. I felt her push me. And I just ran. You followed orders. Wade leaned forward, forcing Kim to meet his eyes. She gave you a direct command to move. You moved. That's not cowardice. That's discipline. It doesn't feel like discipline. Kim's jaw tightened. It feels like I let her die. Wade had no answer for that, because the truth was he felt the same thing. Every operator in this room felt the same thing. They had left their commander behind. Alive or dead, they didn't know, and no amount of tactical justification would ever erase that weight. That was the price of following orders when every instinct screamed otherwise. The debrief happened 2 hours later, as scheduled. Wade stood before a conference table occupied by Captain Morrison, the base intelligence officer, and a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Collins and never explained her agency affiliation. Wade walked through the mission again. Timeline. Entry points. The weapons cache in the basement, which they had successfully documented before the ambush. The coordinated attack. The collapse. And then the question he had been dreading. Did Lieutenant Commander Brennan give any indication that she suspected a trap? Collins asked. Her voice was flat, unreadable. Wade considered the question carefully. No, ma'am. The intelligence package appeared solid. Satellite imagery confirmed the target structure. Human sources corroborated the presence of weapons material. There was no indication of enemy awareness until the ambush initiated, which suggests either a communications leak or a deliberate setup. Collins made a note in her tablet. We'll be investigating both possibilities. Ma'am. Wade's voice hardened slightly. Lieutenant Commander Brennan ran a tight operation. Her communication security was beyond reproach. Collins looked up. Her eyes were cold, assessing. I'm not questioning her competence, Chief. I'm questioning whether she was compromised by external factors beyond her control. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Wade answered every question with military precision, revealing nothing beyond the facts. By the end, his throat was raw and his patience was gone. But the mission wasn't over. That became clear when Morrison stopped him at the door. Chief, there's something you need to know. Wade turned. Morrison's face had changed, harder now, carved with something that looked like determination. We're not filing the missing in action paperwork yet, not until the full 24 hours has elapsed. Sir, call a hunch. Morrison glanced toward the window, where the snow continued to fall over the mountains surrounding the base. Sarah Brennan has survived situations that would have killed anyone else. I've seen her walk out of places that should have been her grave. Until I see a body, I'm not ready to believe she's gone. Wade felt that flicker again, that thing he didn't believe in. 24 hours, Chief. Let's give her 24 hours. The hours crawled. Wade couldn't sleep. He sat in the operations center, watching the drone feeds from Khosrow, tracking enemy movement patterns around the collapsed power station. The hostiles had established a perimeter around the site, 12 combatants visible on thermal imaging, with likely more in the surrounding structures. They were searching for something, or guarding something. At hour 12, Wade noticed a change in their behavior. 3 of the enemy fighters broke off from the perimeter and began moving northwest, toward a series of drainage tunnels that dated back to the Soviet era. According to the old infrastructure maps they had studied during mission planning, those tunnels connected to the power station's basement level. But the tunnels had been marked as collapsed and impassable. Wade stared at the feed. His exhausted mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Why would the enemy send a search team into impassable tunnels? Unless they weren't impassable. Unless someone was using them. At hour 14, Wade's radio crackled. It was a sound he hadn't heard in nearly a day. The specific pattern of static that indicated someone was transmitting on Lieutenant Commander Brennan's personal encrypted frequency. His heart seized in his chest. Base, this is Viper 2. I'm receiving a transmission on Viper Actual's frequency. Stand by. He pressed his headset closer, straining to hear through the interference. What came through wasn't voice. It was code, a series of long and short bursts, irregular intervals, no clear pattern that matched standard military protocols. But Wade recognized it anyway. Montana, 16 months ago. during the winter survival evolution, when their communications equipment had failed and they had needed an alternate signaling method. Brennan had taught them a duration-based code that she had developed years earlier, not quite Morse, not quite anything else. A personal cipher that existed nowhere in any manual. Wade grabbed a pen and started translating. POSILN-COMPROMICD. His hand shook. MOBILE. She was alive. She was moving. NED1 to 2 HOURS. Son of a... Wade was on his feet before he finished the thought. Morrison, Captain Morrison. The base commander arrived at the operations center 3 minutes later, still buttoning his jacket. What is it? Wade thrust the translation into his hands. She's alive. Brennan is alive. She transmitted using a personal cipher from our Montana training. Position compromised, mobile, requests 12 hours. Morrison read the message 3 times. His face went through a series of transformations, disbelief, hope, calculation. She's moving to the drainage tunnels. Wade continued, pointing at the map display. That's why the enemy sent a search team. They must have detected something. But she's ahead of them. She's navigating toward. He traced the tunnel system with his finger. Here, the old water treatment facility, 800 meters northeast of the power station. That's deeper into hostile territory. Yes, sir, but it's also closer to the secondary extraction point we designated during mission planning. She knows where we'd look for her if the primary was compromised. Morrison stared at the map. Wade could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Risk assessment, resource allocation, the terrible calculus of military decision-making. She asked for 12 hours. Morrison said slowly. That puts us at hour 26. Past our operational window. Sir, with respect. I know. Morrison held up a hand. I know exactly what you're going to say. And you're right. He turned to the communications officer. Get me JSOC on a secure line and start spinning up that extraction bird. The next 12 hours were the longest of Wade's life. He spent them in the operations center, tracking every piece of available intelligence. Drone feeds, signal intercepts, weather patterns, enemy movement. He built a picture of the battlefield that was as complete as he could make it, searching for any advantage that might help Brennan survive. The enemy had expanded their search perimeter. They knew she was alive now. The search team they had sent into the drainage tunnels had found evidence of recent passage. Blood traces, footprints in the accumulated grime, the impression of a body that had rested against a wall before moving on. She was injured. Wade knew that without being told. The collapse would have inflicted significant damage, and the fact that she was moving slowly enough to leave evidence suggested she was operating at reduced capacity. But she was still moving, still completing the mission. That was Brennan. At hour 18, another coded transmission came through. Yenium Y AWRE. CAC Chi ISDC PLN. NK PRO TYPS. FULL DOCUMENT DLN SCCURED. EXTRACD WINDOW 0-6-0-0. Wade read the message 3 times, then 4, making sure he understood. The weapons cache was deception. North Korean prototypes. She had the documentation. This was an intelligence failure. This was an intelligence operation, and they had walked right into it. Collins appeared at his shoulder. What does it mean? It means the enemy wasn't trying to hide weapons from us. Wade's voice was grim. They wanted us to find them. They wanted us to document them and bring that documentation back to Washington. It's a false flag. Make it look like North Korea is proliferating advanced weapon systems in this region when they're actually not. To what end? Policy manipulation. Justify intervention. Create international pressure. Wade shook his head. That's above my pay grade. But Brennan figured it out. She is proof. Collins's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Wade recognized it. The subtle adjustment of someone who had just realized the stakes were much higher than they had originally believed. We need that documentation. We need her, Wade corrected. The documentation is worthless if she doesn't get out alive. The extraction window was set for 0600 hours. Wade's team, minus Hayes, who was still recovering from his injuries, assembled in the briefing room at 0400. Jensen, Torres, Kim, Sullivan, for operators plus Wade, ready to go back into Khosrow and retrieve their commander. Listen up. Wade stood before the tactical display, pointing to the map of the area. Secondary extraction point is here, the eastern ridge, 200 meters above the town. Brennan will be approaching from the northeast, using the old service road that runs along the ridgeline. Our job is to establish a secure perimeter and provide covering fire if necessary. What's the enemy disposition? Jensen asked. Significant. They've been reinforced since we left. Current estimate is 40-plus combatants spread across the town. They know she's alive and moving. They've been trying to intercept her for the last 12 hours, and she's still ahead of them. Torres's voice held a note of awe. After everything, that's a commander. Wade let the words hang for a moment. Now, let's make sure we're there when she needs us. The helicopter inserted them at 0515, 3 kilometers east of Khosrow, on a ridgeline that offered concealment and a clear line of sight to the extraction point. The snow had finally stopped, but the accumulated powder was knee-deep in places, making movement slow and exhausting. Wade positioned his team along the ridge. Torres and Kim established overwatch positions with their 13 Malawian Quachas sniper rifles, giving them fields of fire that covered the entire eastern approach. Jensen and Sullivan took flanking positions, their M4A1S ready to engage anything that tried to approach from the north or south. Wade himself took the center position, his optics trained on the service road that wound up from the town below. 0600 came and went. No sign of Brennan. 0615, still nothing. At 0623, Wade spotted movement on the thermal imaging. A single figure moving slowly up the service road. The gait was uneven, favoring the left side, compensating for an injury. Contact. Single individual, for 100 meters, approaching from the northeast. Confirm identity? Jensen's voice came through the radio. Wade adjusted his optics, zooming in on the figure. The shape was right. The movement pattern, despite the injury, matched Brennan's distinctive stride. But something was wrong. She wasn't alone. Behind her, maybe 200 meters back, a line of figures was emerging from the tree line. 6, 8, 12. More. We've got company, Wade reported. Hostile element in pursuit. Approximately 20 combatants. They're closing. Do we engage? Wade did the math. 20 hostiles against 5 operators. The terrain favored defense, but they were significantly outnumbered. Engaging would reveal their position and invite a prolonged firefight that could compromise the extraction. But the alternative was watching Brennan get run down 300 meters from safety. Hold fire, Wade ordered. Let them close. We engage only when. The crack of a rifle shot split the morning air. It hadn't come from his team. Wade swung his optics toward the sound and saw something impossible. The lead hostile, a man carrying what looked like a PK machine gun, had dropped. The shot had come from somewhere ahead of the enemy column, somewhere between the hostiles and Brennan's position. Another shot. Another hostile fell. Then a third. 3 kills in 6 seconds. From a shooter who was still 400 meters from Wade's position. What the hell? Torres's voice was barely a whisper. Wade finally located the source of the gunfire. A small cluster of boulders on the ridgeline, maybe 50 meters above the service road. And there, partially concealed by the rocks and what looked like thermal camouflage fabric, was a figure with a rifle. Brennan. She wasn't running from the enemy. She had let them follow her into a kill zone. The remaining hostiles scattered, seeking cover, but they were caught in the open. Brennan's rifle cracked again. A precision shot at what Wade estimated was 650 meters. No suppressor, accounting for wind and snow glare. A searchlight mounted on one of the enemy vehicles exploded in a shower of sparks. She's taking out their optics, Jensen realized. She's blind fighting them. Without their lights, the enemy couldn't see her. Without their lights, they were stumbling through knee-deep snow with no idea where the fire was coming from. Wade watched 3 more of them fall before the survivors broke and retreated back toward the tree line. Viper 2, this is Viper Actual. Brennan's voice came through the radio for the first time in 26 hours. It was raw, strained, but unmistakably hers. Extraction point is hot. Recommend you sanitize before I approach. Wade was already moving. Copy that, Actual. We're on it. The remaining hostiles numbered 11. They had taken cover in a depression about 150 meters south of the extraction point, using the terrain to shield themselves from Brennan's line of fire. That put them directly in Wade's. Torres. Kim, you have the shot. Affirmative. Take them. The Mk-13S spoke in synchronized thunder. 2 hostiles dropped. Jensen and Sullivan opened up on the flanks, their M4S adding to the chorus. Wade advanced down the ridgeline, rifle at his shoulder, putting rounds into anything that moved. It lasted 47 seconds. When the shooting stopped, 11 enemy combatants lay in the snow, their blood turning to white powder crimson. Wade didn't feel anything. Not satisfaction, not regret. Just the cold mechanical efficiency of a job completed. Area secure, he reported. Viper actual, you're clear to approach. The figure that emerged from behind the boulder cluster barely looked human. Brennan's tactical vest was torn in multiple places, the fabric stained with dry blood and concrete dust. Her left arm was bound to her chest with what looked like strips of thermal camouflage fabric, an improvised sling for what Wade immediately recognized as a compound fracture. Her face was a mask of bruises and lacerations, her lips cracked and bleeding from exposure. But her eyes were clear, and she was walking under her own power. Lieutenant Commander. Wade's voice was steadier than he felt. Good to see you, ma'am. Chief. Brennan stopped in front of him. She was carrying a waterproof case in her good hand, the kind used to protect sensitive electronic equipment. I believe I'm late for my extraction. Wade couldn't help it. He laughed. It was a sound of release, a relief of something dangerously close to joy. Ma'am, you are 26 hours late. I think we can overlook it. The extraction helicopter arrived 4 minutes later, the rotors beating the snow into a swirling vortex around them. Sullivan immediately moved to Brennan's side, his medical training taking over as he assessed her injuries. Compound fracture of the left ulna, 3 cracked ribs, maybe 4. Significant blood loss. I'm amazed you're conscious. He looked at her with something like wonder. Commander, you should be in shock. I'll shock when the mission is complete. Brennan handed Wade the waterproof case. Inside is everything. Photographs of the cache, documentation showing chain of custody, and USB drives recovered from an enemy communications hub I found during my exit. You found a communications hub? They built their CP in the tunnels. Didn't expect anyone to come that way. A ghost of a smile crossed her battered face. They also didn't expect someone to spend 14 hours navigating 800 meters of collapsed drainage system with a broken arm. Wade stared at her. The sheer impossibility of what she had accomplished was only beginning to register. Commander, how? Brennan's expression shifted. The smile faded, replaced by something harder, more complicated. I heard you follow orders. Her voice was quiet. I heard my team leave when I told them to leave. That's how. She met Wade's eyes. Do you know why that matters? Wade shook his head. Because when that ceiling came down, when I was buried under 15 feet of rubble with a broken arm and 3 cracked ribs, the only thing that could have made it worse was knowing my team was dying above me trying to dig me out. She reached out and gripped Wade's shoulder with her good hand. You gave me the gift of knowing you were safe. You followed the order. And that gave me the freedom to focus on survival instead of worry. Wade felt something shift in his chest. The guilt that had been eating at him for 26 hours, the weight of leaving her behind, didn't disappear, but it changed, transformed into something he could carry. Get on the burr, ma'am, he said softly. Let's get you home. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Wade sat in the waiting area with his team, just as they had sat 26 hours earlier when they had believed Brennan was dead. But the atmosphere was different now. The weight of grief had been replaced by something lighter, exhaustion mixed with relief, fear giving way to cautious hope. Hayes had joined them, limping on his bandaged leg, but refusing to stay in his bed. I had to know, was all he said when Wade questioned his presence. The surgeon emerged at hour 3, his face revealing nothing. The fracture was complicated, bone fragments in the soft tissue, significant nerve damage. But she's stable. She's going to need extensive rehabilitation, but she should regain full function eventually. When can we see her? Kim asked. She's asking for you now. The surgeon shook his head in disbelief. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen anyone maintain consciousness through that level of trauma. Your commander is not normal. That, Wade thought, was the understatement of the century. They found Brennan propped up in a hospital bed, her left arm encased in a cast and her torso wrapped in bandages. The monitors beside her beeped steadily, tracking vitals that should have been far worse than they were. Team! Her voice was weaker than before, but her eyes still held that unshakable steadiness. Report. Wade stepped forward. All operators accounted for, ma'am. Hayes is recovering well. The intelligence package you recovered has been transmitted to JSOC for analysis. And Wade hesitated. Ma'am, the implications are significant. The weapons cache was North Korean, prototypes of systems they haven't officially deployed. The documentation you recovered shows it was planted as part of a deception operation targeting U.S. intelligence analysis. Designed to manipulate policy, Brennan finished. I read some files before I exfiltrated. They wanted us to find those weapons, document them, and bring that documentation back to Washington. Create the impression of North Korean proliferation in a region where it doesn't actually exist. Which raises a question. Wade met her eyes. How did they know we were coming? Brennan was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. The operation was compromised from the beginning. Someone in the intelligence chain, either on our side or in an allied service, fed them our timeline and approach route. She paused. The USB drives I recovered may contain evidence of that leak. Collins appeared in the doorway. Her expression was unreadable. Lieutenant Commander, the analysis is preliminary, but I can tell you this. The information you recovered is going to fundamentally reshape our understanding of enemy operations in this region. We're looking at a network that spans 3 continents, 17 operation centers, 47 individual operatives who we now believe are running surveillance and deception operations against U.S. Special Operations personnel. Brennan absorbed that. And the source of the leak? Collins hesitated. We're still investigating, but we believe it originates from within an allied intelligence service. Someone who has been feeding information to the network for at least 18 months. 18 months. Wade's jaw tightened. That means every operation we've run in this region during that time has been potentially compromised. Collins nodded. Yes, which is why the intelligence Lieutenant Commander Brennan recovered is so critical. It doesn't just expose a deception operation. It gives us the tools to dismantle the entire network. Wade looked at Brennan. She was staring at the ceiling, her expression distant. He recognized that look, the weight of command settling back on his shoulders that had already carried too much. People died because of that leak, she said quietly. Operations failed. Teams were ambushed. All because someone decided their agenda was more important than American lives. And because of what you did, we can stop it. Collins stepped closer. Commander, I need you to understand something. The analysis is still ongoing, but preliminary estimates suggest that the intelligence you recover will allow us to neutralize the entire network within the next 60 days. That's dozens of compromised agents extracted, hundreds of future operations protected, thousands of lives saved. Brennan didn't respond. She just kept staring at the ceiling. Wade understood. The math made sense. One person suffering against thousands of lives saved. But math wasn't the same as justice. And it would never be enough to erase the friends they had buried, the operations that had failed, the trust that had been betrayed. Get some rest, ma'am, he said softly. We'll handle the follow-up. The network fell within 47 days. Wade led the team on 3 additional operations during that window, each one targeting a different node of the enemy infrastructure that Brennan's intelligence had exposed. Jensen and Torres provided overwatch. Kim ran communications. Sullivan handled field medical. And Hayes, despite his injury, insisted on participating in the final assault on the primary enemy operations center. I owe her this, was all he said when Wade questioned the decision. Brennan watched the operations from FOB Sentinel, her arm still in a cast, her ribs still healing. She provided tactical guidance over secure channels, her voice steady and precise even as her body recovered from the impossible. Wade could hear the frustration in her tone. The warrior forced to sit on the sidelines while her team finished what she had started. But he also heard something else. Pride. The final tally was everything Collins had promised. 17 enemy operations centers dismantled, 47 operatives neutralized or captured, dozens of compromised agents from allied services extracted and brought to safety. The network that had been running surveillance operations against U.S. Special Operations for 18 months was gone, and the source of the leak, a mid-level analyst in a European Allied Intelligence Service, was quietly arrested and turned over to his own government for prosecution. 6 weeks after the extraction from Khosrow, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Brennan stood before an assembled formation at Naval Special Warfare Group 4 headquarters. Her arm was out of cast, though still weak. Her ribs had healed. The lacerations on her face had faded to thin white scars that would never fully disappear. She was receiving her 3rd Bronze Star, and Wade was standing beside her, receiving his first. The citation was classified, of course. The details of the operation would never be made public, but the people who mattered knew what had happened. The people who mattered understood the price that had been paid. After the ceremony, Brennan found Wade standing alone outside the headquarters building. The sun was setting over Virginia coastline, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed impossibly peaceful after everything they had endured. "Chief," she came to stand beside him, her eyes on the horizon. "I have something to tell you." "Ma'am, Captain Morrison has recommended that you be promoted to senior chief. The paperwork is already in process." She paused. "But that's not the important part." Wade turned to look at her. "What's the important part?" "The important part is that I've requested you be assigned as my executive officer for the next deployment cycle." She met his eyes. "Shared command structure. My authority, your judgment. Partners, not subordinates." Wade was silent for a long moment. The weight of what she was offering settled over him. Not just a promotion, but a fundamental shift in their relationship. A recognition that he had proven himself capable of leading, of making the hard calls, of carrying the burden that command required. "Ma'am, I don't know if I'm ready for that. You left me behind." Brennan's voice was gentle but firm. "You followed an order that every fiber of your being screamed against. You took command of a broken team and held them together through 26 hours of uncertainty. And then you led them back into hostile territory to extract me." She shook her head. "Wade, you've been ready for a long time. You just needed permission to see it." Wade thought about the rubble pile in Khosrow, the weight of that decision, the guilt that had eaten at him for weeks afterward, even knowing that Brennan had survived. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," he admitted, walking away from that site. "I know." Brennan's hand landed on his shoulder, the same gesture she made in the helicopter, the same weight of understanding. "And that's exactly why you're ready. The hard decisions don't get easier, Wade. You just get better at living with them." She turned and walked back toward the headquarters building, but she stopped at the door and looked back. "Hayes requested a meeting with me earlier today. He wanted to apologize for leaving me in Khosrow." She paused. "I told him what I'm going to tell you. Following that order wasn't abandonment. It was trust. It was believing that I knew what I was doing, even when the situation seemed impossible." Her eyes softened. "You gave me a gift, Wade, the gift of knowing my team was safe. And that gift is what allowed me to survive." Wade nodded slowly. The guilt didn't disappear. He suspected it never would entirely, but it shifted, transformed, became something he could carry rather than something that carried him. "I understand, ma'am." "Good." Brennan smiled. "Because we deploy in 6 weeks, and I'm going to need my XO ready." She disappeared through the door, leaving Wade alone with the sunset and the silence. The sunrise found them at the memorial. Wade hadn't planned to come here, but something had drawn him to this place. The quiet corner of the base where the names of the fallen were inscribed in stone. It was tradition, Brennan had told him once, for operators to visit after a successful mission. To remember that success was always built on sacrifice. Hayes was already there when Wade arrived. The young operator stood before the wall, his hand resting on a name that Wade didn't recognize. "My brother," Hayes said without turning around. 3 years ago. Training accident. He never made it to a deployment. Wade came to stand beside him. "I didn't know. Not many people do." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "When the commander pushed me through that breach, when I felt her hands on my vest, I thought about him. I thought about all the people who never got the chance to serve. And I realized something." "What's that?" "The hardest order to follow isn't the one that puts you in danger." Hayes finally turned to look at Wade. His eyes were clear, calm. "It's the one that asks you to leave someone else behind. Because following that order means believing they're strong enough to survive without you. And that takes more faith than any firefight I've ever been in. Wade considered that. The weight of Khosrow, the weight of command, the weight of trust. She said it was a gift, he murmured, following the order. She said we gave her the freedom to focus on survival. I know, Hayes nodded. And that's the lesson, isn't it? That sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone you love is let them go. Trust them enough to handle it alone. Wade looked at the wall of names, at the cost of service, at the legacy of sacrifice that stretched back decades. She's going to change things, he said quietly. The way we operate, the way we lead. She's building something new. I know. Hayes straightened. And we're going to help her. They stood together in the morning light, the sunrise painting the memorial in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, the base was waking up, the sounds of rotors and engines, the voices of operators preparing for another day. And somewhere in the distance, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Brennan was doing the same thing. Because the mission never truly ended. It just evolved. And the people who served, the people who followed impossible orders and trusted impossible commanders and survived impossible situations, evolved with it. That was the lesson of Khosrow. That was a lesson of leadership. And it was a lesson that Wade would carry with him for the rest of his career. Through every deployment and every command decision, and every moment when the weight of others' lives pressed down on his shoulders. He thought about the sunrise, about Hayes beside him, about the wall of names and the commander waiting in the headquarters building with a plan for the future. And he smiled, because this was what service looked like. This was what trust looked like. This was what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. He turned away from the memorial and walked toward the sunrise, toward the future, toward whatever mission came next. The SEALs had thought their commander was gone, but she had emerged from the darkness, and nothing would ever be the same.